Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the highest balcony of the Great Pyramid of Meereen, eyes drifting across the city that sprawled out beneath her, its cramped streets and grand plazas alternating in their dusty shades of sandstone. Each breath of the scorching Essos wind reminded her of the roads that had led her here. She had come as a liberator, a breaker of chains, only to find her new domain roiling with resentment, conspiracies, and old grudges. Yet she had also found fierce loyalty among the freedmen who clasped her hands and named her mother. Once, the thought of crossing the narrow sea had consumed her. Westeros was the land of her birthright, the Iron Throne her final goal. But in the heat of Essos, Daenerys felt a pulse of life unlike anything she had ever known. Her dragons soared through the sunlit skies, symbols of a destiny that was still being forged, and she wondered if her dreams might find a home here instead of across the sea. She had promised freedom, justice, and protection to the people of Meereen, and she had only just begun to make good on those promises. When she retired to her quarters later that evening, she found Jorah Mormont waiting there. The lined weariness around his eyes bore testimony to the pressures he felt in her service. Wordless, he offered her a half-bow, respectfully distant but devoted. He had come to speak of her newest revelation, that perhaps they should not sail to Westeros right away. She studied him, remembering how he had once yearned for her to reclaim the Iron Throne, how he had encouraged her to assert her birthright. But life had taught them both harsh lessons. Conquering was never simple, and a realm could be lost as swiftly as it was won. There were thousands of freedmen here who believed in her, who needed her protection. Her own sense of responsibility kept her anchored to the land she had shed blood to emancipate. Jorah's voice cracked slightly as he asked, "Your Grace, are you certain of this? Not crossing the sea, not moving forward with the fleet?" The time seemed right, after the defeats of the Masters, after forging alliances with the Dothraki. "Are you truly prepared to remain?" His concern was palpable. He was a Westerosi knight, after all, and as eager as any for her to reclaim the realm of her ancestors. Yet, in the same breath, his loyalty was first and foremost to Daenerys, and so he would follow her anywhere. She thought of her dragons, her Unsullied, and the city's restless populace. "If we leave now, Meereen collapses the moment we set foot on our ships," she said softly. "We will have undone every sacrifice we've made. The people will be enslaved again. It can't be like Astapor or Ukai, where we freed them then moved on without the tools to keep them free. If I must be a queen," she continued, her violet eyes burning with conviction, "then I should start here, where I have truly made a difference. If I am to break the wheel, I must ensure the city becomes a fortress of my ideals, not merely a footnote on my path to the throne." Jorah slowly nodded. "Then you will have to contend with the slavers again. The economies of Ukai, Astapor, and Volantis may conspire against you. Meereen's victory was never final, it has only begun. And the sons of the Harpy still lurk in the shadows." A flicker of anger lit Daenerys' voice. "Let them lurk. I will root them out. Let the slavers try their worst. I will face them. Because if I cannot hold Meereen, how can I hope to hold the Seven Kingdoms?" She lifted her chin as though issuing a challenge to the world itself. She expected a retort from Jorah, but he merely placed one hand over his chest in that formal stance of fealty. "Then we stand and fight, Your Grace." Dawn arrived with a haze of gold shimmering across the bay. Daenerys gathered her council, Grey Worm, Missandei, Tyrion Lannister, Varys, Jorah, and Dario Naharis, who had not yet returned to the Stormcrows but seemed perpetually on the threshold between soldier and lover. They all wore expressions of guarded concern, except perhaps Tyrion, who always wore a subtle smile as though everything in the world entertained him in some ironic way. "I have decided," Daenerys announced, her voice echoing in the lofty hall that once belonged to Meereen's great masters. "We will not sail for Westeros. Not now. If I abandon Essos, the cycle of slavery will only begin anew. We will remain, we will rebuild, and we will establish the greatest free city in the known world. From Meereen to Ukai, Astapor, and beyond. This is our mission." Silence filled the space. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath outside. Slowly, Grey Worm said, "The Unsullied have pledged to protect the people. If you say we stay, then we stay. We will fight for Meereen until our last breath." His calm, measured tone reflected the measured loyalty Daenerys had come to cherish in him. Tyrion gave an approving nod. He was from Westeros, but during his time in Meereen, he had witnessed the raw, tangible consequences of her decisions. He'd seen what freedom meant to the once enslaved. "I suppose there's plenty to do here," he remarked. "Slavers in the west, sons of the Harpy in the alleys, and likely every neighbor wanting to test the mettle of the city's new queen. I do enjoy a challenge." There was a flash in his eyes, one that signaled readiness for the political maneuvers to come. Missandei, young as she was, wore the expression of someone who had endured more than her years might suggest. Your Grace, I believe the people will rejoice. Not all of them, but those who matter. They have prayed every day that you would not leave them to fend for themselves. Daenerys felt a surge of confidence. Then let us begin, she declared. We will show Essos a new way. Yet building an empire, she quickly discovered, was no simple endeavor. The months that followed were a litany of challenges. Grain deliveries that never arrived, roads that needed repairing, city walls that had to be fortified. And, of course, the open hostility of old masters who resented her leadership and had no intention of letting slavery die quietly. Daenerys convened daily with Tyrion to manage trade agreements, trusting his cunning to find new allies and navigate the labyrinthine politics of the region. She sat with Varys, who whispered secrets in her ear about plots forming in Volantis or bribes changing hands in Yunkai. She worked with Missandei to send envoys and letters, each one forging new promises or forging alliances through marital ties she had never previously considered. Grey Worm oversaw the training of the city's watch. The Unsullied were few, enough to guard her palace and lead the vanguard in battle, but not enough to police an entire city of thousands. So they gathered volunteers from among the former slaves, men and women alike who wanted to protect their new freedom. The training was intense. Grey Worm's discipline did not waver, but with a quiet kindness he repeated often, "You defend your brothers and sisters. We stand together or we fall together." Over time, Meereen's watch grew into a force that, while lacking the perfect discipline of the Unsullied, held a fiery devotion to their queen. Rumors began to swirl among the city's masses that Daenerys was forging not just the largest free city, but the foundation of a new empire that might stretch beyond anything Essos had seen since the Valyrian freehold. The Freedmen's Council, an assembly that Daenerys herself established, met daily to address grievances. Any freedman, large or small, might bring their troubles before it. Sometimes she heard these petitions personally, sitting in the dais that replaced the old master's seat of power. Under her watchful gaze, thousands found a voice for the first time in their lives. The old aristocracy seethed. Their cloaked conspirators, the sons of the Harpy, attempted more than once to sow discord, murdering Freedmen's Council members and defacing the city's monuments with bloody graffiti. But the city's watch and the Unsullied responded in force. People stepped forward with information, revealing hidden enclaves and hidden weapons. Daenerys made public declarations that any who aided in uprooting the sons of the Harpy would find favor, land, and coin. Slowly, the ring of shadows constricted. One evening, Daenerys stood on the palace steps, cloaked in a sleeveless gown of cream and gold, meeting with a new wave of petitioners. She recognized one voice among them, a man named Sando, an elderly scribe from Yunkai who had taught reading and writing to young freedmen. He knelt before her, tears in his eyes, because the small school he had founded had been burnt to ash by masked men in the night. The Freedmen's Council resolved to rebuild it, but he wondered if there might be more violence. Daenerys descended from her seat and placed a hand on the old man's shoulder, promising not only that the school would be rebuilt, but that she would ensure the Watchers patrolled near it every day. The people in the courtyard murmured among themselves, astonished that a queen would leave her dais to comfort an old teacher. But this was the Targaryen queen they had come to know, one who took every slight against her people as a personal affront. Afterward, she met with her advisors in the Great Pyramid's corridors. Dario Naharis leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, his expression playful yet carrying a shadow of concern. "You show a gentle hand, my queen," he remarked. "Your people will love you for it. But I wonder if the time has come for your other side, the dragon, to emerge. Strike harder at the sons of the Harpy and they may cower before they dare raise another blade." Daenerys folded her arms. "I have shown my dragons before, Dario. There was a time I believed fear was the path to respect. Yet the more fear I sow, the more resentment grows. I want them to follow me because they believe in me, not because they tremble." She thought of her father's name, the Mad King, and how fear alone had never preserved his rule. "Still," she continued, "I won't hesitate to act if more blood is spilled. The sons of the Harpy must be rooted out. If they test me, they will find the fires of Rhaegal, Viserion, and Drogon waiting." It was with that blend of compassion and resolve that Daenerys continued to govern Meereen. Summer receded into autumn, though the Essosi climate remained punishingly hot most days. While Grey Worm's watch combed the city for conspirators, Tyrion and Varys ventured to the outlying regions, forging alliances with local lords who had once made their fortunes in the slave trade but had now pivoted to new mercantile endeavors. Volantis and New Guise remained problematic as rumors of a slaver alliance built in secret. Still, Daenerys had little time to worry about distant cities when Meereen itself was a constant battlefield of hearts and minds. Her dragons grew larger by the day. Drogon soared overhead in black and red magnificence, casting a monstrous shadow that sometimes frightened the citizens below. Viserion and Rhaegal took to roosting on the ridges of the city's walls, occasionally preying on livestock beyond the outskirts. Daenerys insisted that all farmers whose livestock were taken be compensated with coin from the crown's treasury, a policy that fostered goodwill even as the dragons roamed. Still, some remained fearful. At dawn, their roars would echo through the streets, stirring men and women from fitful sleep. But in the public squares, it was not uncommon for children to crane their necks in awe, seeing living legends that their grandparents had only heard of in whispered stories of Valyria. Daenerys, too, felt the bond with her dragons deepen. In the hush of twilight, she would climb to the highest open-air terrace, letting them circle around her in the sky. She would extend a hand, feeling the scorching breath from Drogon's nostrils as he alighted. Sometimes she pressed a gentle palm to his scaled flank, exchanging a communion that transcended words. She knew that in them she held the power to quell rebellion or incinerate entire armies. But she wished to wield that power judiciously. For a queen who had once declared herself the breaker of chains, it was essential to remember that the greatest chains were forged by fear. Word spread that Daenerys Targaryen had broken the wheel in Meereen. Freedmen visited from other cities, hoping to catch a glimpse of the queen. Caravans traveled under her banner, a three-headed dragon on a field of black, escorted by knights who had once marched under kings or Sellsword captains. Slowly, the dream of a new Valyrian freehold, one built not on slavery but on liberty, stirred in the hearts of the hopeful. Skeptics dismissed it as impossible. Others plotted to destroy it before it took root. But to the freedmen who saw Daenerys kneel to comfort a wounded child in the street or stand resolute before an assassin's arrow, it felt as though the future itself was being reborn. While Daenerys attended to civic matters, Tyrion orchestrated trade deals that would ensure grain and goods flowed steadily. He used his cunning to persuade local merchant houses that they could profit more from fair trade than from the subjugation of slaves. Gold changed hands, and though some of these men harbored quiet contempt for Daenerys' new order, the promise of wealth kept their daggers sheathed, at least for a time. Tyrion wrote letters to distant ports, forging ties that might one day overshadow even the trade networks of bravos. All the while, Daenerys remained at the center, a calm in the storm. She listened, considered, and acted. Inevitably, the day came when the Sons of the Harpy tried one final, bold stroke to wrest control of the city. It began with an assassination attempt on a Freedmen's Council official who had been traveling to a border village to negotiate a farmland dispute. The official was murdered and the mercenaries who did it vanished like smoke. Fear rippled through the Freedmen's Council, but Daenerys refused to cower. She called a public assembly at the Plaza of Pride, standing atop a marble dais. Thousands of Meereen's inhabitants gathered to hear her words. Her presence was regal and commanding, framed by the vast pillars that soared behind her. "My children," she began, using the term deliberately. "My people. We have all lost someone to the Sons of the Harpy. They cling to the old ways, to chains, to cruelty. They would spill our blood to keep us from moving forward. This cannot stand. I swear to you now, by the red comet of the sky and the dragons who follow me, that I will see their threat ended. I will not rest until your children can walk these streets free from fear." Her voice rang out strong enough that some claimed even the mountains in the distance heard her vow. "We will bring them to justice. But I cannot do it alone. I need your eyes, your ears, your hearts. Together, we will show them that the days of masters and slaves have ended forever." Her words ignited the crowd. They chanted her name, Mysa, Mother, Daenerys Stormborn. Support swelled among the common folk and information poured in. Encrypted messages, suspicious figures meeting at twilight, homes rumored to house conspirators. The city watch combed every block, Grey Worm at the helm, and soon a network of hidden compartments and passages was unearthed beneath Meereen's oldest districts. One by one, the conspirators were dragged to face justice until a final nucleus of resistance made a desperate stand in a massive wine cellar that served as their hideout. It was Dario who led the charge, storming in alongside the Unsullied. The fighting was fierce and claustrophobic, torches sputtering in the dank corridors, steel clashing in the suffocating gloom. Screams echoed through the narrow hallways. By dawn, it was over, and dozens of harpy masks lay strewn across the stone floor, stained with blood. Dario himself emerged battered but triumphant, a shallow cut across his cheek. Grey Worm escorted the prisoners, ragged men once considered wealthy or influential, through the city in chains for all to witness. Though some called for immediate executions, Daenerys ordered trials. Tyrion assisted in cross-examining the conspirators, ensuring no scapegoat was punished without proof. When the evidence was laid bare, those found guilty were sentenced to hard labor, rebuilding some of the city's crumbling structures. Others were exiled or imprisoned. There were calls for the dragons to be unleashed upon them, but Daenerys resisted, for she wanted her rule to stand apart from the cruelty she had sworn to end. In the aftermath of this purge, the city breathed anew. Quiet nights replaced the constant sense of lurking danger, and the Freedmen's Council found renewed purpose. Daenerys watched as new shops opened in the markets, as laughter once again emerged in the squares where once only fear had reigned. She was exhausted from the trials, from the countless decisions upon her shoulders, but she saw glimmers of hope in every corner. More than once, Missandei would gently remind her to take a moment for herself. In those moments, Daenerys would stroll through the palace gardens she had replanted with exotic flowers from across Essos. She would breathe in the scent of new blossoms and remind herself of the living tapestry of people and ideals she was responsible for nurturing. Out of this evolving tapestry arose new alliances. Hearing of Daenerys' unwavering stance and the end of the Harpy threat, neighboring villages sent envoys hoping to become part of her domain. Slavers from Ukai and Astapor attempted to stoke rebellions, but with each passing day, more common folk recognized that the Targaryen queen protected her own. They began to question the old power structures. Slowly, in pockets of the region, rebellions against local masters broke out. Some were quenched, others found success. Daenerys offered shelter to any who fled such uprisings, and her city expanded, crowded though it was. Tensions between these refugees and the original inhabitants flared occasionally, competition for resources, old tribal rifts, grudges that no royal decree could simply erase. Yet Daenerys refused to let these tensions fester. She established new committees within the Freedmen's Council, specifically tasked with aiding resettlement and ensuring fair distribution of food. At Tyrion's suggestion, she offered incentives to local landowners willing to donate or lease unused farmland to these newcomers, weaving threads of unity wherever possible. There were arguments and feuds, but Daenerys' presence loomed large, and not a soul in Meereen questioned that she was invested in their collective well-being. As the city stabilized, Daenerys sent out word to Dothraki clans that roamed the nearby plains. She had once brought them across the sea, but many had split off after her victory, unsure of this new life under walls of stone. She invited them back, promising open trade and safe passage. Some Khalasars responded with curiosity, forming small camps on the outskirts. Others turned to raiding farmland, believing only in the old ways of taking what they desired. But more and more Dothraki came to see that Daenerys' city offered a better life than the endless cycle of plunder and flight. They brought their horses and their traditions, adding another vibrant layer to the melting pot that Meereen was becoming. One balmy night, Daenerys stood on the city walls alongside Jorah and Missandei, gazing out at the campfires in the distance. "Look at them," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the dancing lights. "In Westeros, 1,000 years of petty feuds have shaped their politics. Here, it's different. The land is vast, the peoples are varied, and they can find common cause if we show them how." Jorah sighed, though not unhappily. "You've always had a way of uniting people who should have no reason to stand together, Your Grace. You turn foes into allies and slaves into dreamers. But are you not worried? The longer you remain in Essos, the more distant the Seven Kingdoms grow." Daenerys nodded. "I'm aware, but the Iron Throne can wait. If my name is meant to echo through the ages, let it be for more than just seizing a seat someone else once ruled. Let it be because I built something that endures." She touched Jorah's arm lightly, acknowledging the conflict in his heart. "And when that time comes, when Essos is stable and strong, we will look west again." Rumors of her success percolated across the seas, carried by ships that traded in Meereen's bustling harbor. Sailors from Westeros told of a Targaryen queen who commanded dragons and ruled a liberated city. Some in Westeros doubted the tales, others took them as a sign that a new era was dawning. Lords who once feared her potential invasion began to worry that her power might become too vast if she continued to consolidate her rule in Essos. Others whispered that she was a savior who might one day overthrow the tyrants of the Seven Kingdoms as well. Yet Daenerys had more immediate concerns. With trade rising, a new wave of opportunists arrived in Meereen: merchants, mercenaries, and spies. Varys quietly identified some as agents sent by wealthy slaver families from Volantis or by the triarchs of the city who remained deeply wedded to the slave trade. These agents aimed to destabilize Daenerys' realm from within, sowing unrest or forging hidden alliances with local malcontents. The Queen's private war had moved from the public squares to whispered corners. She authorized Varys to form an intelligence network that reached across the coastline, employing former slaves with reasons to resent the old power structures, as well as cunning individuals who recognized that Daenerys' cause promised a better life than the old status quo. A year passed. Meereen transformed in subtle yet striking ways. New aqueducts were constructed to bring water from distant springs, ensuring a reliable supply in the city. Gardens sprouted in once barren courtyards, cultivated by freedmen who no longer feared having their meager produce seized by cruel masters. The Freedmen's Council evolved into a more structured legislative body with representatives from each district and from the Dothraki camps outside. It was an experiment in governance that few in Essos had seen before, reflecting Daenerys' belief that voices from all walks of life should be heard. She no longer made every decree alone. She listened to the council, negotiated, and occasionally compromised. The young queen was learning that ruling meant more than commanding. It meant guiding and allowing others to grow into their own roles as leaders. Still, not every day was peaceful. Raids from across the sea tested her naval defenses. Tyrion supervised the expansion of Meereen's small fleet, while Grey Worm scouted the outskirts for any sign of trouble. The red and black banners of House Targaryen fluttered defiantly atop every ship, a declaration of the city's new identity. Dario took pride in leading strikes against pirates or slaver galleys that ventured too close, relishing the thrill of combat. He returned from these expeditions with a roguish grin, always boasting of how the queen would reward him. Daenerys smiled at his humor but also recognized the necessity of such shows of force. If her city was to be safe, her naval power had to be respected. In time, envoys arrived from Yunkai, wearing uneasy smiles and bearing gifts of wine and spices. They claimed to wish for reconciliation, but Daenerys knew better. Likely, they had come to assess her strength, to see if she had grown complacent. She received them in the Hall of Lapis, a great chamber adorned with tapestries that depicted her victories against the Yunkish armies in the past. The sight of those tapestries was not lost on the envoys, who offered meek words of cooperation. Daenerys, with Tyrion at her side, listened politely, extracting a promise of trade deals and certain tributes. She did not trust them, of course, but she recognized the value of a temporary peace. By the time they left, the envoys' faces were pale, unsettled by the sight of her towering dragons perched like gargoyles on the balconies above. Another year saw further expansion. Villages once riddled with bandits found themselves under the protection of Meereen's watch. Freedmen who had once labored in plantations now owned small farms of their own, giving a fraction of their produce to support the city's coffers in return for the queen's protection. With each new settlement that joined, Daenerys' domain swelled, and so did her burdens. She had to send more watchers, more administrators. Tyrion spent endless hours writing letters, forging alliances by marriage between local families, sometimes to the annoyance of those who had not grown used to the idea of a Lannister playing matchmaker. Daenerys found a certain weary satisfaction in these victories. They were less dramatic than toppling a tyrant, but they were the building blocks of a lasting order. Her personal life, however, was a realm of sacrifice. She had little time to mourn her lost illusions or indulge in romantic fantasies. Her closeness with Dario ebbed and flowed, often overshadowed by her duties. She knew, deep down, that a union forged by attraction alone might complicate the political alliances she needed to maintain. Yora remained ever at her side, a sturdy pillar of devotion, though the disease that once threatened him seemed to have receded. She had commanded him to find a cure, and in some manner of miracle or resilience, he returned free of the grayscale. Still, the scars on his heart ran deeper, for he loved her with a quiet longing that would never be reciprocated in the way he wished. Missandei remained her dearest confidant, her presence a soothing balm when the weight of the crown grew too heavy. Days stretched into months, and before long, Meereen was unrecognizable from the city she had first liberated. Great amphitheaters were restored, not for bloodsport, but for performances and communal gatherings. The black market that once trafficked slaves now specialized in legitimate goods thanks to strict regulation and patrols. Foreign artisans traveled from Karth, Pentos, and Lys, all drawn by the whispers of a rising power. And always, Daenerys' dragons soared overhead, guardians of the realm as it was reborn. Their presence reminded any would-be conquerors that this domain was under the protection of fire and blood, yet the queen had chosen to be a mother, not a tyrant. Inevitably, the masters of Volantis decided they could not abide this revolution any longer. Spies delivered word to Daenerys that a grand alliance of slaver cities was being formed to reclaim Essos from her infection, as they called it. The Triarchs poured gold into raising a mercenary army, forging pacts with the martial cities on the mainland. It was rumored they had even reached out across the sea, promising Westerosi mercenaries vast sums to join their cause. When she heard these tidings, Daenerys felt a flare of the old rage within her. She had given these slavers every chance to adapt. If they wished to drown the continent in blood, she would answer in kind. Her council agreed, war seemed inevitable. But this time, the lines had been drawn differently. She did not fight alone. The Freedmen's Council pledged every resource, grain, blacksmiths, coin. The City Watch volunteered en masse, and the Dothraki Khalasars who had joined Meereen offered their riders. Even some younkish lords, seeing an opportunity to break free of the Volantene yoke, secretly promised men and horses if Daenerys guaranteed them autonomy. It was a patchwork coalition, but each member shared a single guiding principle: they no longer wished to be pawns of the old order. Preparation for war consumed the city. Forges burned night and day, forging steel for swords, spears, and arrowheads. War galleys bristled in the harbor, ready to set sail at a moment's notice. Grey Worm drilled the new recruits relentlessly. Tyrion negotiated supply lines to ensure her armies would not starve. Varys' whisperers uncovered crucial details about the enemy's movements. Daenerys herself oversaw the grand strategies, meeting with captains, weighing advice. On the eve of the campaign, she stood upon the walls once again, gazing over the city she had nurtured. She thought back to the timid, young woman she had once been, sold into marriage with a Dothraki warlord. She remembered the heartbreaks and betrayals that had brought her here, the moment she had unleashed her dragons from the pyre. She had come so far, and now she was about to face the greatest test of her reign. But this time, she was not alone, and what she fought for was bigger than any single throne. She closed her eyes, allowing the evening wind to wash over her face. When she opened them, she looked to the horizon where the sprawl of Essos beckoned and where an uncertain future awaited. The war that followed would become the stuff of legend in Essos. The Volantene-led alliance attempted a hammer strike against the outskirts of Daenerys' territory, hoping to seize strategic river crossings and starve her city. But they had not counted on the speed and ferocity of the Dothraki cavalry, nor on the cunning of Tyrion Lannister, who orchestrated feints and ambushes worthy of the most seasoned generals. Nor had they considered that Daenerys Targaryen would take to the skies on the back of Drogon, unleashing fire upon their supply lines. In battle after battle, her dragons turned the tide, incinerating siege engines and scattering enemy formations. Still, it was not an easy victory. The allied slaver forces fought bitterly, and there were times when the Queen's army was pushed back. Meereen's Watch, though brave, lacked the professional training of old imperial legions. Losses mounted. At one point, Dario was wounded, pierced by an arrow in the shoulder. Grey Worm nearly lost his life protecting a flank from a swarm of mercenaries. Daenerys grieved each casualty, each face that would never return to the city. But she pressed on, for the alternative was to allow the slavers to rechain Essos. The culminating conflict took place near the River Sarnori, where both sides assembled in full strength. Daenerys, astride Drogon, soared above the enemy lines, scanning for weaknesses. Her dragons roared, and the thunderous answer came in the form of scorpion bolts launched from Volantene war machines, long, sharpened bolts that could potentially wound a dragon. Tyrion had warned her of them. He directed archers from the ground to pick off the enemy's artillery crews. The Dothraki unleashed a cavalry charge at the decisive moment, cutting through the lines like a blade. Upon a signal, Daenerys dove low, letting Drogon unleash a torrent of flame that consumed ranks of slaver soldiers. The allied forces wavered, panicking, and in that moment the Unsullied advanced in flawless formation, capitalizing on the disarray. The fields burned red with blood, but by day's end, the slaver alliance was shattered. Captains threw down their arms, mercenaries fled. Scorpion bolts littered the battlefield, some embedded in the scorched earth, others in the carcasses of horses and men. Daenerys hovered above it all, her silver-gold hair whipping in the wind, lit by the glow of Drogon's smoldering breath. She felt triumph, yes, but also deep sorrow for the carnage. Yet she knew that this was the price of freedom in a world that refused to yield without a fight. In the days following victory, Daenerys took extraordinary measures to ensure that those who surrendered were spared unjust reprisals. She insisted on fair treatment for prisoners of war, many of whom were conscripts or men lured by the promise of gold. Yet for the ringleaders, the masters who financed the war, she had no mercy. They were tried for crimes against humanity, enslavement, torture, the mass murder of innocents. Some were executed, a warning to others. Some had their fortunes seized and redistributed to rebuild the war-torn regions. Daenerys' justice was swift, but it carried more purpose than the blind retribution that had claimed so many lives in Essos for centuries. In the aftermath, her territory expanded once again. Freedmen from Volantis and other cities erupted in celebration, toppling statues of their former masters. Many traveled to Meereen, the heart of the new order. Some declared Daenerys a living goddess, though she discouraged such worship. She was no goddess, she was a woman with dragons, a queen who had learned the cost of power. But she understood the emotion that drove them. They saw in her the culmination of long-buried hopes. Years passed, solidifying her reign. New roads linked once isolated villages. Slave pens across the region were dismantled. Coins minted in Meereen bore her profile on one side and a broken chain on the other. Literature and art flourished as freedmen explored their talents once suppressed. Braavos, the staunch opponent of slavery, recognized Daenerys officially, offering favorable lending and opening new trade lines. The city-state of Qarth, once aloof, extended a cautious hand of friendship, intrigued by the unstoppable force rising to their west. Daenerys continued to mature as a ruler. She delegated tasks wisely, ensuring that power did not reside in a single pair of hands. She recognized the value of each advisor, from Tyrion's sharp wit to Varys' network of spies, from Missandei's heartfelt counsel to Grey Worm's unwavering discipline. Yora was her traveling emissary, forging relationships and securing treaties in distant lands. Dario led punitive expeditions against rogue warlords who still clung to the old ways. And at the center of it all was Daenerys herself, a queen beloved by many, feared by some, but respected by all. Occasionally, she would steal a moment of quiet reflection, remembering the Iron Throne and the country of her birth. News drifted in from Westeros, tales of wars between great houses, a winter that was rumored to be the coldest in a century, and the ongoing saga of political betrayal. She had not forgotten her ancestral home nor the vow she once made to reclaim it. But as she surveyed the vibrant tapestry of life that had emerged under her guardianship, she realized her destiny might have been more profound than a single seat in a distant land. One evening, an emissary from Westeros arrived, an austere nobleman with salt and pepper hair who had journeyed far. He came bearing an offer of marriage from a northern lord, an alliance that might unite Daenerys' might with one of Westeros' remaining strongholds. Daenerys listened politely, but she did not answer immediately. She walked the gardens with Missandei, pondering the future. "I've given my life to these people," she said, gazing at the blooming flowers. "Leaving now would feel like abandoning my children. Still, I wonder if crossing the sea is my duty, if the realm that bore me truly needs me." Missandei's voice was gentle. "You are free to choose, Your Grace. You have fulfilled every promise you made in Essos. You have liberated thousands upon thousands. Perhaps the day will come when the Seven Kingdoms needs you, truly needs you. But you do not have to decide today." Daenerys considered that, hearing the distant cry of Drogon as he soared above the city's spires. "The realm over the sea might need me," she said quietly, "but this realm has me now. I will not break faith with those who have spilled blood at my side, those who have trusted me to protect them." A new sense of clarity filled her. If the day comes when Westeros truly calls, if they send envoys not just of ambition but of genuine desperation, then perhaps I will answer. Until then, Essos is my home. The night air carried the scent of jasmine. She closed her eyes, recalling the dusty streets she had once walked, the prayers whispered by the enslaved who had looked to her for hope. She had changed the face of a continent. Her dragons, once small enough to fit in a brazier, now soared like the stuff of myth. The city she had fought so hard to protect had blossomed beyond her wildest dreams. The memory of her ancestors urged her to return to the Iron Throne, but the living present called her to remain. In time, those old voices faded, and Daenerys Targaryen's eyes opened to behold the life she had built. She was no longer a beggar queen or a frightened girl. She was the mother of dragons, the breaker of chains, a conqueror who chose not to abandon her conquests, but to rule, nurture, and protect them. From the slums of Meereen to the plains where the Dothraki rode free, from the forges that rang with steel to the orchard gardens that fed her growing population, all of it reflected the force of her will and the warmth of her compassion. She found contentment not in the promise of a distant throne, but in the reality she had forged, an empire in Essos that, while imperfect, was the clearest embodiment of her dreams. And so Daenerys, in turning away from the idea of immediate conquest in Westeros, became something far more. She became a living legend in the land of her rebirth, a queen who dared to believe that freedom was more than a word, that justice was more than a decree, and that love for one's people mattered more than ancient claims to power. Seasons turned and the city of Meereen carried on. Children grew up never knowing slavery, only stories of the day the Dragon Queen came to set them free. Mercenaries and traders found honest work in the expanding economy. Farms produced bountiful harvests with the help of irrigation systems designed by foreign engineers who found safe harbor under Daenerys' reign. Festivals celebrated the anniversaries of liberation, filling the streets with music, dance, and the sweet aromas of roasted meats. The Freedmen's Council continued to debate, sometimes fiercely, but always with the knowledge that their queen valued their voices. Dragons circled overhead, as much a part of Meereen's skyline as the Great Pyramid. Sometimes Daenerys would take flight with Drogon, leaving her duties behind for an hour to survey the fields from the sky, feeling the rush of wind against her cheeks. In those moments, she understood what it meant to be free. Not bound by prophecy, not caged by the expectations of men who died long before she was born, but free to carve her own destiny. And in that freedom, she found joy and a strength that no throne in the world could ever provide. As the sun rose each morning over Essos, its rays revealed an empire reshaped by her resolve. People did not fear the Targaryen name, they revered it as a symbol of hope, of rebirth, of a bond forged in blood and fire but tempered by love. Word spread throughout the land of a queen who had refused to abandon her children for the sake of old feuds across the sea. And in the hearts of those who understood, she became, unequivocally, their queen. And thus Daenerys Targaryen, far from the Iron Throne that once filled her every waking dream, built something greater than any single seat of power. She built a realm where the downtrodden could stand tall, where once shackled hands could learn to sculpt and weave and write, and where the dragons flew as protectors rather than harbingers of dread. In time, songs would be written of her choice, not to seize Westeros, but to remain in Essos. Minstrels told tales of the breaker of chains who turned conqueror into caretaker and soar upon wings of fire to guard the people who had claimed her heart. Across continents, her name echoed, Daenerys Stormborn, the unburnt, the mother of dragons, the queen who chose mercy and devotion over ancient birthright. And so the wheel did not just break. It was reinvented, and a new era dawned in the scorching lands of Essos, under the watchful gaze of a woman who realized that sometimes, destiny is what you choose to make of it. Daenerys Targaryen woke before dawn each morning to the faint glow of Essosi daylight breaking along the horizon. The view from her private chambers in the Great Pyramid had changed over the years. Once a city of dusty squares and riotous dissent, Meereen now thrived with green spaces, with open markets that bustled at all hours, with laughter and music drifting up from streets that had once been stained by blood. Beyond the city walls, farmland stretched into the distance, dotted with cottages newly built by freedmen who had earned enough to settle the land for themselves. It was a reality born of her conviction that Essos deserved more than a single act of liberation. It deserved lasting peace, a fair governance, and the chance to cultivate the freedom she had promised. She stood at the window, letting the cool air of morning brush over her. As the sky brightened, the faint silhouettes of her dragons became visible. Regal and Viserion perched on the city walls, scanning the plains for any threat or perhaps just enjoying the gentle light. Drogon soared above, as black as the receding night, describing lazy arcs through the sky. His roar, carried on the wind, was both a comfort and a reminder of the power she held in her blood and in her bond with these beasts. Though she felt no fear, she understood the awe her dragons inspired in others. That awe was a cornerstone of her sovereignty. People thought twice about attacking the Queen of Dragons. But she also knew that awe alone was not enough to rule. She had learned to temper it with compassion, with genuine governance, and with a vision for the future that bound her people's loyalty not through fear, but through trust. She went to dress for the day. Missandei awaited her in the antechamber, scrolls pressed to her chest, already prepared with the day's schedule. Daenerys offered a small, warm smile of greeting. She and Missandei had weathered storms together, from the first time Daenerys had freed her in Astapor to the war with the slave masters of Volantis. So much time had passed, yet Missandei's devotion remained absolute, her calm presence an anchor to which Daenerys often clung. "Good morning, Your Grace," Missandei said, voice soft but purposeful. "I have the usual council session scheduled for midday, followed by petitions from the Freedmen's Council regarding the new trade roads to the east. The representative from Karth arrived last night and hopes to speak with you at sunset. And Varys wishes to give a private briefing." Daenerys listened, tying back her silver-gold hair with a ribbon. In these years, it had grown longer, brushing her waist, and silver strands caught the morning light like filaments of fire. Her garments were simpler than they had once been. She had eschewed the elaborate gowns that some queens might wear. A dragon-scale motif ran along the bodice, but otherwise her attire was practical, a deep gray that wouldn't show the dust of the city or the scorch marks that clung to her after riding Drogon. She had come to prefer clothing that allowed her to move freely, to ride without hindrance, and to show that she was a queen of action, not just ceremony. "That's a full day," Daenerys said, glancing toward the door. "Let's begin with Varys. I need to know what secrets his little birds have brought home." Missandei inclined her head and led Daenerys along the polished corridor where unsullied guards stood at attention, spears in hand. Over time, the Great Pyramid had shed many of its harrowing associations of brutality, but the memories of slavery persisted in the city's older generations. This building had once been the seat of absolute oppression. Now it housed a queen who had broken those chains. Daenerys had replaced many of the grim statues with banners that bore her sigil, a three-headed dragon, and with bright tapestries that depicted the city's rebirth. The corridors were lined with columns depicting not master and slave, but the forging of new roads, the dedication of farmland, and the majestic forms of her dragons who guarded this realm from the skies. They found Varys waiting in a small council room adjacent to the throne hall. He wore his customary robes, shifting with quiet grace as he bowed. Though the spider claimed no official position beyond her master of whisperers, Daenerys was well aware that his influence stretched from one end of Essos to the other, with contacts even in distant ET. Over the years, Varys had proven invaluable, uncovering schemes, thwarting rebellions, and ensuring that she was rarely caught off guard by foreign powers. And yet Daenerys never forgot the warning Tyrion had once offered her. Men like Varys served the realm as they saw fit, but what exactly they called the realm might change. Trusting the spider meant acknowledging that his loyalty came, in part, from belief in her cause and in part from self-preservation. But so long as their interests aligned, she was content to make use of his gifts. "Your Grace," he began, gesturing for her to sit at the round wooden table. "I have tidings from the eastern roads. The expansion of your realm has not gone unnoticed. Certain warlords near the Bone Mountains grow anxious about this new order we've established in the western half of Essos. Most remain too fractious to unite, but I worry about a figure named Cave in the Red, a would-be conqueror who styles himself a prophet of an obscure faith. My little birds suggest he might be trying to rally other rogue factions to challenge your domain in the border regions." Daenerys took a seat, Missandei standing just behind her. She studied Varys's face, searching for any hint of exaggeration, but his expression was earnest. "Have these warlords threatened any of our allied settlements yet?" she asked, her tone measured. "Not openly, not yet," Varys replied, his hands folded on the table. "But we've lost caravans on the eastern trade route. The caravans that vanished bore your sigil and carried goods bound for newly founded towns that rely on Meereen's support. We suspect Kavan's men or his allies might be responsible." Daenerys felt a flare of anger. She had worked hard to bring stability to that region, to ensure that even the smallest villages enjoyed the fruits of freedom. Bandits and rogue warlords threatened to unravel her efforts. She closed her eyes for a moment, recalling how she had once taken a city by burning the slavers' fleet, how she had once stood among the Dothraki to command a Khalasar. The young woman who had freed the Unsullied in Astapor had been ruthless when necessary, but she had also learned the dangers of absolute brutality. She would respond, but with caution. "I won't allow these new settlements to fall prey to marauders," Daenerys said firmly. "The Freedmen's Council fought for those roads. We must protect them. I'll dispatch an escort for future caravans, and we'll send envoys to see if negotiations are possible. If Kavan truly craves power, perhaps we can entice him into an alliance, or at least neutrality. If not," she let the sentence trail off. Her dragons were always a final resort, but a potent one. Varys nodded. "As you say, Your Grace. I will make discreet inquiries, ensuring we understand how large his forces are before we commit to battle." A rap at the door signaled Tyrion's arrival. He slipped in with a bottle of wine tucked under one arm, a smirk dancing on his lips. His hair had grayed a bit at the temples over the years and lines of care spread around his eyes, but he moved with the same brisk energy. "Working early, I see. I thought I'd bring something to fortify us." He set the bottle on the table and glanced at Varys. "Cave in the Red, I presume? You've heard?" Daenerys asked. "I have. The Freedmen's Council is worried about the caravans we've lost. Some of them demanded immediate retaliation, while others fear we'll stretch our forces too thin if we police every road." Tyrion pulled out a chair across from Daenerys. "I told them to trust your judgment." She almost smiled. Tyrion had grown into one of her closest confidants, though a part of her had once viewed him only as an exiled Lannister seeking new advantage. Over time, he'd proven he could govern, negotiate, and strategize better than almost anyone. She leaned forward, fingertips resting lightly on the table. "We will not allow the Freedmen's Council to be terrorized. But we must act wisely. We can't fight every bandit lord across Essos, or we'll never cease to be at war. Let's proceed with measured caution. We protect our roads and gauge Kavan's threat. If he truly moves against us, we'll respond decisively." Varys and Tyrion exchanged glances. "Very good, Your Grace," Varys said. "I will keep you informed of any new developments." Daenerys dismissed them with a nod of gratitude, and they departed into the corridor, speaking in low tones about how best to gather more information. Missandei closed the door behind them, stepping closer to Daenerys. "You look troubled," she observed softly. Daenerys pressed her lips together. "It feels never-ending," she said. "One threat falls, another rises. Yet every day, the Freedmen's Council sees more growth, more stability. We can't abandon them. I just wish building a new world didn't involve so much blood." Missandei regarded her with compassion in her dark eyes. "A new world always demands struggle, I think. You've shown mercy. You've also shown strength. That balance is what holds everything together." Daenerys exhaled slowly. "Yes, it is." They stepped out of the council room and descended the broad marble steps that led into the main hall of the Great Pyramid. Light streamed in from high windows, illuminating a floor polished to a mirror-like gleam. Freedmen waiting to petition the queen stood in neat lines, each carrying some token of their craft or a letter of complaint, or simply needing her blessing on a personal matter. Daenerys took her seat on a raised platform, no longer the imposing dais once used by the great masters, but a more modest structure that put her closer to eye level with her petitioners. Even here, she tried to break from the old symbols of domination. The first petitions of the day ranged from mundane to urgent. A group of farmers complained that the distribution of irrigation water favored certain districts. A midwife asked for help establishing a network of women's health centers for expecting mothers. Representatives from a blacksmith's guild expressed concern about an influx of cheaper metals from Qohor that undercut local prices. Daenerys listened intently, responding when necessary but often deferring to the Freedmen's Council. She had learned that delegating power not only lessened her burden but gave the freedmen agency in their own governance. By midday, she felt the slow burn of fatigue behind her eyes. Still, she continued, for these petitions were the lifeblood of her reign. Without them, she would become as distant and tyrannical as the masters she had overthrown. Missandei kept the proceedings running smoothly, passing her the necessary parchments or whispering clarifications of local laws whenever needed. Just as the sun cast a bright rectangle on the hall's floor, the last petitioner approached, a caravan leader in dusty robes who bowed with evident respect. His accent revealed he hailed from the border regions. He removed his head wrap, revealing a face weathered by countless journeys, and spoke nervously of bandits attacking the roads near Lazer, a district that had once been farmland for the old masters. "Your Grace, we need more guards. The Watchers do their best, but the roads are long. We've lost wagons. People vanish. The Freedmen's Council, they've tried to help, but we need your dragons. Or we need more soldiers. Our children can't sleep at night." Daenerys' heart sank. Not for the first time, she reflected on how each new territory that joined her empire became both a promise and a liability. "I understand," she said gently. "I'll consult my captains. We'll see about increasing the watch patrols. Though I can't promise a dragon on every road." She allowed a small, reassuring smile. "We will not abandon you. I will do all I can to ensure your safety." The man bowed repeatedly, tears glistening in his eyes, thanking her before he retreated into the crowd. The next moment, as Daenerys rose to signal the end of the session, a stir rippled through the onlookers. A messenger rushed in, one of the city's watchers, clad in partial armor, dusty from apparent travel. He dropped to his knee, breathing heavily. Daenerys felt a quiver of disquiet as she beckoned him forward. He produced a small rolled parchment sealed with a blob of green wax. "Your Grace," he gasped, "urgent news from Yukai. The city's new leaders request immediate aid. They say the water supply has been sabotaged by unknown forces and citizens are falling ill. They beg you to send healers and protection." A hush fell over the hall. Tyrion, who had re-entered quietly, caught Daenerys' eye from the side. She heard the unspoken question. Another crisis? Another city in jeopardy just when Meereen itself was struggling to maintain its hold on the roads. But Yukai had pledged loyalty after the war, transitioning from a slave-based economy to one of free labor. They had needed help making the shift, and she had provided advisors and watchers. Now they needed her again. Daenerys took the parchment, breaking the green wax with her thumb. The letter was brief, clearly written in haste. Her eyes scanned it. They claim a plague might spread if the water supply remains compromised. People are fearful. The city's Freedmen's Council can't identify who's behind it. Some suspect the last remnants of the old masters. Her voice carried across the hall, bringing renewed tension. "I'll not see Yukai suffer after all we've done." She turned to Missandei. "Summon Grey Worm. We must dispatch a contingent of healers and watchers along with engineers to inspect the water systems." She looked over at Tyrion. "We'll also need supplies, food, medicine, clean water. Organize caravans. The journey won't be easy, especially if the roads are under threat." Tyrion nodded, quickly calculating. "I'll see to it. But perhaps we should send a diplomatic envoy as well to calm tensions. People will panic if they believe the city is being poisoned. We need to show them that your rule is stable, that we have no intention of letting Yukai fall." "Send Jorah Mormont," Daenerys decided. "He's spent time there before. He'll speak with the Freedmen's Council. Let's be swift but careful. We don't know who orchestrated the sabotage." The Watcher left, relieved by the promise of help, and the crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring about the news. Daenerys lingered in the hall. She could almost see the weight of expectation in the eyes of those around her. Once she had been seen as a foreign conqueror. Now the people relied on her for everything: food, security, healing. The sense of responsibility could be crushing, and yet she couldn't abandon them. This was the price she paid for forging an empire on the ashes of slavery. Those who had once been subjugated looked to her as the living emblem of their hope. She left the dais, Missandei trailing behind, and walked through corridors that led out to a sun-drenched terrace. The heat of midday was a tangible force, pressing against her skin. From here, she could look over the city's rooftops, the markets and workshops, the mosaic of cultures blended under her banner. Unsullied patrols moved in disciplined ranks on the streets below, ensuring that criminal elements remained at bay. In the distance, she glimpsed the harbor where foreign vessels with bright sails came and went. Spices, silks, knowledge, and new alliances all flowed through Meereen's gates. It was a living dream, a far cry from the sack of Astapor or the turmoil of Yukai in earlier years. She closed her eyes, remembering how many times she had wanted to sail west to reclaim an ancestral throne she had never truly seen. Instead, she had found her purpose here, in this sun-scorched land. At times, she yearned for simpler days, though those days had never really been simple. Her life had been a series of trials, shaping her from a frightened girl to a breaker of chains and finally to the mother of an empire unlike any Essos had known for centuries. Footsteps clicked on the terrace. She turned to see Grey Worm, his lean face implacable as always, though now he carried new scars from battles waged in Daenerys' name. He bowed. "Your Grace, you wish to see me?" She stepped closer, her expression purposeful. "Yes. Yukai needs a contingent of watchers, along with the city's best healers. You'll select them. I also want you to send a company of Unsullied enough to help secure the water supply. But be mindful. We can't weaken Meereen's defenses too much with bandits on the roads." Grey Worm nodded, always direct. "Yes, Your Grace. I will arrange it at once." She placed a hand briefly on his shoulder, a gesture of gratitude. Though Grey Worm's face gave little away, she sensed his pride in fulfilling her commands. Over time, he had become more than a soldier. He was a guardian of the people, and his devotion to Daenerys went hand in hand with his devotion to the freedmen. He left with his usual economy of words, and Daenerys remained on the terrace for a moment longer, letting the full blaze of the sun fill her eyes with warmth before she returned inside. The day progressed in a blur of arrangements, caravans loaded with medicinal herbs, barrels of fresh water, crates of grain. Tyrion oversaw the logistics with the Freedmen's Council. Missandei wrote a flurry of messages to Yukai, coordinating with the local council to expect the arrival of Jorah and the Watch. Daenerys penned a personal letter to the Freedmen's Council there, urging them to remain calm and to root out any last vestiges of the old regime. By sunset, the palace courtyard bustled with supplies, pack animals, soldiers, and healers all preparing to depart under moonlight when the heat would be less oppressive. She observed from a high balcony as the columns of men and wagons assembled. Torches lit the courtyard, flickering shadows over the faces below. Her gaze lingered on Jorah Mormont, who wore dusty traveling leathers and a new sword at his hip. He caught sight of her above and bowed gravely, an unspoken promise in his eyes that he would see her well done. She trusted him deeply now. He had proven his loyalty and repented for his past betrayals, and she had forgiven him in her own way. Just as the convoy rumbled out of Meereen's gates, Daario Naharis appeared at her side. His steps were light, his face bearing that irreverent smile she had grown used to. A faint scar across his cheek was a souvenir of the last campaign against the Sons of the Harpy. "It never ends, does it?" he remarked, leaning on the stone parapet. "One city in crisis, another under siege, warlords on the horizon. You could almost forget you wanted the Iron Throne once." She looked at him, remembering how once, in another life, she had been far closer to him in a way that wasn't purely political. Over time, she had redefined their bond. They still shared a loyalty and mutual affection, her duties and growth had pushed her beyond simple romances. Even so, Daario remained at her side, often traveling to handle the more dangerous tasks, always returning with that wolfish grin. "I don't regret staying," she said softly. "I've built something real here. Even if it's hard, I see the difference it makes every day." Daario nodded, turning to watch the torches fade into the darkness outside the city walls. "So do I, Daenerys Storeborn. So do I." When dawn arrived, she found herself once again delving into the complexities of governance. Tyrion came bearing news of the Qartheen envoy who waited in the outer halls. Qarth, city of merchants, illusions, and opulence. Once she had been turned away from its walls, left to wander a desert with her small Khalasar. Times had changed. Now Qarth sought her favor. With a tired smile, she allowed Missandei to guide her through another day of meetings, forging trade agreements that would open new markets for Meereen's goods. She had discovered that the illusions of Qarth were best navigated with caution, for the warlocks and merchant lords there manipulated with words more dangerous than many swords. But the envoy this time seemed genuine. He offered precious stones, exotic fabrics, and a vow of neutrality in any conflict that might arise between her and the slaver holdouts in the southern regions. And so she negotiated. Tyrion's quick wit caught the envoy whenever he tried to slip in an unfavorable clause, ensuring that Qarth did not simply reap Meereen's bounty without contributing its fair share. Varys whispered potential threats in her ear, that the Qartheen might be forging an alliance with the exiled master families from Astapor. But the envoy denied it with calm smiles. Politics was a dance, and Daenerys had learned the steps. Days turned into weeks. Dispatches arrived from Yukai describing scenes of chaos, water sources fouled with toxins, decaying corpses in the wells. Healers worked around the clock to cleanse the city, but the sabotage had been cunning. More watchmen had to be called for as roving gangs profited from the fear. Meanwhile, word reached Daenerys that Cave and the Red had begun harassing the outer villages near Meereen's eastern frontier, demanding tribute in the form of harvest grain and threatening brutal reprisals if the villagers refused. Each night, Daenerys tried to find solace in the presence of her dragons. She would stand on the rooftop terrace, the wind whipping her hair, calling Drogon with a low, throaty hum. He would descend from the sky, massive wings blotting out the stars. Sometimes he landed near her, letting out a huff of smoke as if to say, "Why so troubled, mother?" She would rest a hand on his scaled neck, feeling the furnace-like heat beneath. In those moments, she felt an overwhelming sense of kinship. He was power incarnate, a relic of the mythical past, but also very much her child who recognized her as the source of his freedom. The same bond extended to Rhaegal and Viserion, though Drogon was always the fiercest and most autonomous, the great shadow of night. If necessary, she would fly him to Yukai, to the eastern roads, anywhere that demanded her presence. But she knew that if she brought the dragons to every conflict, she risked overshadowing everything her governance had built. Even so, there were times she wondered if the old, immediate retribution might be simpler. As the weeks stretched on, the crisis in Yukai improved. Jorah's letters arrived, describing how the sabotage had been orchestrated by a small cabal of former masters who had hidden among the city's freed population. The Watchers apprehended them after a tense standoff, but not before dozens had died of illness. The city's Freedmen's Council was in an uproar, demanding harsh punishment. Jorah, ever the mediator, was urging them not to give in to bloody reprisals. Daenerys replied, instructing him to set up a public trial much like they had done with the Sons of the Harpy in Meereen, with evidence and witnesses. There would be justice, but not a slaughter. When the day of judgment came, she received word that thousands had gathered in Yunai's main square. There, the conspirators confessed under evidence so overwhelming that denial would have been futile. Yora relayed through a messenger raven that the Freedmen's Council had condemned them to lifelong labor, tending the city's sewers and water systems under close supervision, forced to undo the damage they had wrought. Some in the crowd had clamored for their deaths, but Yora had reminded them that their queen wished to break the cycle of violence. This new age required a different kind of reckoning. Upon hearing that, Daenerys felt a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. The sabotage had cost lives, but she clung to the belief that punishment without redemption only perpetuated old patterns. Forced atonement, at least, might teach them the value of what they had so callously destroyed. But across the plains, Cave and the Red continued to rise in infamy. More caravans vanished, villages paid him grain, and rumors suggested he performed vicious rites, sacrificing captives to his unknown gods. Word spread that he wore red robes soaked in the blood of his victims. The Freedmen's Council in Meereen argued over whether to mount a full-scale campaign or to try for diplomacy. Tyrion, cautious, advised patience until they had a clearer picture of his strength. Daario advocated for swift and brutal action, claiming that letting warlords fester only invited more trouble. Grey Worm prepared the Unsullied in case Daenerys gave the order. Varys collected fragments of intelligence that hinted Cave and had allies in the shadows, though no one knew their numbers or motives. As tension mounted, Daenerys convened a war council. Late evening light slanted through the windows of a modest chamber lined with maps of Essos. Around the table stood Tyrion, Grey Worm, Daario, Missandei, and Varys. Small braziers flickered, casting shadows on their faces. A map on the table showed Meereen at the center, with red tokens marking known outposts loyal to Daenerys and black ones marking territories of uncertain allegiance. Varys tapped the map lightly with a slender finger. Caven claims to draw power from a dark faith. We can dismiss such superstition, but not the fervor it inspires. Fear can bind men together just as effectively as gold can. Worse, I've heard tell of strange happenings. Villagers claimed a red mist came at night to claim their sick, and Cavan's men arrived soon after, declaring it the will of their prophet. Tyrion poured himself a cup of wine, frowning. Superstitions grow in a vacuum of order. If Cavan can maintain an aura of mystery, local peasants might hand him what he wants just to avoid his supposed curses. We need to show them that we can protect them from both bandits and boogeymen. Daario tapped his dagger against his thigh. A good cavalry charge would quell that nonsense. Let them see the Targaryen banners, let them taste unsullied steel. That's enough to make any rumormongers fold. Daenerys looked at Missandei. What do we know from the Freedmen's Council in those regions? Missandei consulted a small log. They're requesting immediate help. Crops are being stolen at harvest time. Girls and boys taken as hostages. The council has tried to rally local militias, but fear paralyzes them. They want to believe in your protection, yet Cavan's threats are closer at hand than we are. A quiet fell. Daenerys gazed at the map. So many people put faith in her name, but faith alone didn't stop a man with a sword from breaking down a cottage door. She pressed her hands flat on the table. All right, she said. We cannot allow this warlord to grow. We'll send a mixed force, Unsullied, City Watch, and Dothraki cavalry. Daario, you'll command the cavalry. Grey Worm, you lead the Unsullied. March swiftly, protect each village in turn, and cut off Cavan's supply lines. If possible, capture him. If not, kill him. But be wary of illusions or cunning. He may try to flee deeper into Essos. Daario's grin widened. Finally, a chance to do something instead of babysitting skirmishes. Grey Worm nodded solemnly. As you command, your grace. Tyrion held his wine cup thoughtfully. Shall I stay here to govern in your absence? Or do you intend to lead the charge yourself? Daenerys hesitated. There was a part of her that longed to fly with Drogon to end Cavan's threat in a single blaze of fire. But every time she charged into a battle, she risked the stability she had worked so hard to build. Her presence was sometimes needed more in Meereen than on a battlefield. No, she said slowly. I will remain here this time. I must oversee the ongoing situation in Yunai, and the Freedmen's Council in Meereen needs me. Daario and Grey Worm can handle this. But if they call for me, if the threat becomes too great, I'll come with Drogon. Daario's eyes flickered with an unspoken dare, but he said nothing, only bowed. He had seen her unleash the dragons often enough to know how quickly the tide could turn in her favor. The meeting ended with a sense of collective resolve. Within days, the combined force set out, banners of black and red snapping in the wind. The City Watch, though not as disciplined as the Unsullied, had grown in skill and loyalty. Their presence would help hold the villages once Cave and was driven out. The Dothraki riders would sweep the plains, cutting off any attempt to retreat. The Unsullied would form the core of the attack, implacable as ever. Weeks passed in tense anticipation. Reports trickled back, villages liberated, small skirmishes won, Cavan's men scattering. But the warlord himself eluded capture. A message from Dario described encountering booby traps and illusions designed to frighten superstitious foot soldiers, wooden effigies drenched in animal blood, eerie chants in the night. Yet the combined force kept advancing. Another dispatch arrived, bearing darker news. Some watchers found entire villages deserted, as though the inhabitants had fled in terror or been marched away by Cavan's soldiers. A sense of dread settled over Meereen. It felt reminiscent of the old horrors of war that Daenerys had tried to expunge from Essos. Still, she remained steadfast. Life in Meereen continued, new roads were constructed, trade with Karth expanded, the Freedmen's Council debated new laws to govern property rights. Merchants came from Pentos, from Bravos, even from the Summer Isles, all intrigued by the stable empire that Daenerys had forged. Beyond the city, farmland blossomed under irrigation and fair labor practices. Each day, Daenerys received updates on Yunai's steady recovery. The water had been purified, the city's Freedmen's Council re-established order, and the economy slowly revived. It was a success she clung to, a reminder of what perseverance could achieve. But Cavan remained at large. Eventually, a new letter arrived, one that made Daenerys's blood run cold. It bore Dario's seal, but the handwriting was that of a watch officer. "Your Grace, Captain Dario has pursued Cave and into the Painted Mountains. Grey Worm and the Unsullied remain to secure the plains. We have freed many villages, but have discovered evidence of mass sacrifice and blood magic. Captain Dario believes Cave and to be performing rites to strengthen his grip on local tribes. Casualties among the Watch increase as fear spreads. Morale falters. Dario requests your presence. We do not know how else to break Cavan's hold." Daenerys read it twice, her heart pounding. Blood magic, she remembered too well the witch Miri Mazdur and the horrors that had befallen Khal Drogo. She remembered the abomination that rose from shadows when the Red Priests of Lawlor meddled in the fates of kings. If Cavan was tapping into something dark, it might not be mere rumor, or it might be a trick. Either way, Dario's urgent request was clear. She called her advisors together, though Yora was still in Yunai. Tyrion's face was grim as he read the note. Blood magic is not something to be taken lightly, but it could also be the ravings of a madman who wraps himself in superstition. Either way, Dario asks for me. He wouldn't do so lightly, Daenerys said. Tyrion offered a resigned nod. He does have a flair for the dramatic, but if the Watch is losing morale, the presence of your dragons might be the only thing that can tip the scales back. Varys, hands folded, added in a low voice, "Your Grace, if you leave Meereen, I can keep watch over the city. But remember, many enemies may see your departure as an opportunity. I will do my utmost to ensure stability here." Daenerys looked from one face to another. A sense of inevitability settled in her. She had tried to remain a queen on the throne, letting her generals handle the battles. But Essos was still a land of powerful mysticism and fear, and sometimes only the presence of dragons could dispel that fear. At last she exhaled. "Prepare my departure. I will take Drogon. Rhaegal and Viserion stay to guard Meereen. Missandei, you will remain here as well, help Tyrion and Varys keep order. I'll bring a handful of my personal guard, but not too many. The city must remain secure." Missandei pressed her lips together, concern in her eyes, but she bowed. "As you wish, Your Grace." Before dawn the next day, Daenerys donned leathers reinforced with light armor. She climbed to the highest terrace. Below, a small retinue of horsemen and watchers waited at the courtyard. Tyrion stood there too, arms folded, expression worried but resolute. She looked for Drogon's silhouette against the pale morning sky. A single call brought him swooping down, gigantic wings beating the air with a thunderous whoosh. Dust and pebbles scattered, lesser birds fled. Daenerys felt the rush of raw power wash over her as he landed, the terrace trembling beneath his weight. She approached him, resting a hand on the warm black scales of his flank. His eye, golden and fierce, flicked to her, and a low rumble vibrated in his chest. The bond between them kindled at once, a primal recognition that she was his mother, his rider. She felt the surge of adrenaline as she climbed onto his back, gripping the ridges she had come to know so well. Drogon extended his wings. With a roar, he launched them both into the air, and the great pyramid fell away below in a swirl of wind and stone. The retinue of horsemen would follow the roads, but Daenerys would reach Dario's camp far sooner. She soared above Essos, the wind lashing her hair, the distant desert plains unfolding beneath. She guided Drogon eastward, toward the Painted Mountains, which rose in the far distance like a chain of jagged teeth. The flight was both exhilarating and sobering. From this vantage, she could see the patchwork of farmland, the winding roads, the villages and towns that had blossomed under her reign. It was a tapestry of life she had helped weave, and it reminded her why she could not allow warlords like Kavan to tear it apart. She stopped only once at midday, letting Drogon rest near a remote water source. The local herders who saw them dropped to their knees in awe. Daenerys, used to such reactions, merely asked if they had seen large columns of soldiers pass by. They had, a week before, wearing her banner and heading into the mountains. She thanked them, took a swallow of water from her flask, and then mounted Drogon again. By late afternoon, the Painted Mountains loomed beneath a bruised sky. Vivid stripes of mineral deposits ran along their slopes, reds, oranges, and yellows, and Daenerys caught glimpses of winding gorges and hidden valleys. She spotted a cluster of tents pitched at the foot of a steep ridge. The black and red banner on a tall pole marked it as Dario's camp. Drogon descended, and the men below scattered, half in terror, half in jubilation. Dario emerged from a large tent, his face lighting up when he saw her dismount. He immediately approached, ignoring the heat blasting from Drogon's nostrils as he bowed in greeting. His traveling leathers were caked in dust and dried blood, and there was a ragged quality to his features that spoke of hard days. "I knew you'd come," he said, voice rough with fatigue. "We can't flush Kavan out of the mountains. He's turned the local tribes to his side, and they greet us with cunning traps. My men whisper about curses. Even the Dothraki grow uneasy." Daenerys studied the terrain, the jagged slopes where an enemy could hide 100 ambushes. "Where is Grey Worm?" "He holds the lowlands." Dario gestured to the northwest. "He's securing the villages, ensuring they have supplies. But Kavan and his closest men retreated higher. He's established a fortress up there, an abandoned mine from what we can tell. We tried to storm it, but the paths are narrow, and every ledge is a kill zone. We lost good soldiers." She nodded grimly. "We'll find a way. Show me your map." Inside the large command tent, Daenerys found the City Watch captains and a few Dothraki bloodriders clustered over a crude map sketched on rough parchment. It marked the labyrinth of switchback trails, mountain passes, and hidden gullies. Dario explained that every time they advanced, Kavan's archers rained arrows from above, then faded away. The Watchers were too frightened to move by night after hearing rumors of blood magic in the dark. Daenerys pressed her lips together. "We'll face this head-on. Tonight we make camp. At first light, I'll scout from the sky on Drogon. If Kavan hides in a fortress, I'll see the approach and find a vantage point to strike from above. Then our ground forces can move in." A flicker of relief lit Dario's eyes. That might be the only way to corner him. But be cautious. If he truly practices any vile sorcery, there's no telling what illusions he might craft to hide from you. She lifted her chin, remembering all she had overcome: Kartha's warlocks, Miri Mazdur's deception, the Red Priest's prophecies. "I've learned not to underestimate illusions, but illusions cannot stand against Dragonfire." She looked around at the tired men in the tent, saw the weariness etched in their faces. "Rest tonight. Spread word that I am here. Let everyone know the Mother of Dragons has come. Fear no illusions." That night, campfires glowed against the towering shapes of the Painted Mountains. Soldiers warmed themselves, passing skins of water or cheap wine. Dothraki riders shared quiet stories in their own tongue, occasionally glancing at Daenerys' tent where she conferred with Dario on final details. Drogon perched on a rocky outcrop above, a living sentinel that warded off any surprise attack. His low rumble was a lullaby that both calmed Daenerys and reminded her of the dangers ahead. In the still hours before dawn, she rose. Daario was already awake, strapping a sword to his side. She walked through the camp, acknowledging the nods of weary soldiers, then climbed up to where Drogon lay. Even at rest, his body radiated heat. She placed a hand on his side, murmuring softly. He stirred, one molten eye flickering open. Daenerys mounted him, and with a powerful kick of his hind legs, Drogon took to the sky. The first light spread across the mountain peaks, painting the rock faces with stripes of scarlet and gold. Daenerys urged Drogon higher, scanning the ridges and ravines. Below her, the camp seemed tiny, a cluster of embers glowing in the dawn. The painted mountains revealed their secrets slowly, narrow passes, steep cliffs, winding footpaths that spiraled around abrupt drops. She spotted what looked like an old mine entrance near a plateau ringed by sharpened stakes. Armed men patrolled it, small as ants from her vantage. At the mouth of the mine, she saw a lurid red banner that must be Kayvan's. A wave of grim determination washed over her. So this was where he hid, in a fortress built into stone, protected by cunning geography. But she had a weapon that no fortress could resist forever. She banked Drogon lower, sweeping wide around the mountain to see if there were archers or scorpions. The men below gawked up at the sky, pointing. She saw only a few catapults, fashioned from wood, dwarfed by the cliffs. She tugged at Drogon's reins, guiding him back to camp. The flight made her heart pound with adrenaline, but it also stoked her confidence. Whatever illusions Kayvan thought he had, he could not hide from the sky. Upon landing, she found Daario and the gathered captains waiting expectantly. "I've seen it," she told them, drawing a rough line in the dirt to indicate the fortress. "We'll split our forces. Grey Worm will lead the Unsullied along this pass," she pointed, while the Dothraki sweep around to block any escape route down the opposite slope. City Watch archers can hold vantage points behind them. Once they're in position, I'll make a pass from the air to scatter Kayvan's defenders. Then you advance. If Kayvan tries to flee into the mine, we'll corner him." Daario rubbed his stubble jaw. "That pass is narrow. Our men will be exposed, but it's the best approach we have." She nodded. "Move slowly, keep shields high. If they try to bury us in rock slides, we'll rely on your vantage from the other side. Once the fortress is breached, show no mercy to those who resist, but if any surrender, take them alive. I want Kayvan if possible." Word spread through the camp with renewed morale. A plan had been formed, led by the queen herself. By mid-morning, the forces marched. Daenerys remained behind the lines, letting the Unsullied and City Watch take up positions. She saw the tension in their eyes, the knowledge that the Painted Mountains had already consumed many lives. Drogon crouched nearby, flicking his tail, eager. At the signal time, she mounted, sword into the sky, and angled toward the fortress. Below, Kayvan's men unleashed arrows, but their trajectory was erratic. Drogon flew too high, and his scales were strong as plate mail. Daenerys circled once, spotting the wooden catapults. She urged Drogon downward. A roar tore from his throat, echoing in the canyons. Flames spewed forth, bathing the catapults in an inferno that sent the enemy scrambling. The stench of burning wood and flesh wafted upward. The defenders shouted, some fleeing deeper into the fortress. From her vantage, Daenerys saw the Unsullied emerge along the pass in perfect formation, shields raised. Arrows clattered against their locked shields. Dothraki riders galloped along the ridges to flank the enemy. The assault began in earnest. She strafed again, driving defenders from their positions atop a precarious ledge. Rocks tumbled, taking men with them. Kayvan's red banner snapped in the wind. She glanced around, searching for any sign of the warlord himself. A swirl of dust and smoke made it hard to discern. She heard faint chanting echoing in the canyons, almost inhuman. Drogon snarled, wings beating an uneven rhythm as if unsettled by the sound. The ground forces pushed forward, step by step. She saw Grey Worm at the front, his spear clashing with an enemy sword, the Unsullied behind him advancing in disciplined rows. Daario's cavalry thundered down from the slopes, cutting off a route of escape. Kayvan's men fought fiercely, almost in a frenzy, as if driven by more than simple fear. Some wore red handprints on their chests, chanting in a guttural language. Daenerys watched from above, frowning. The confrontation took on an otherworldly tone, the Painted Mountains seeming to glow with unnatural color under the midday sun. Then she spotted a figure emerging on a high ledge above the mine entrance, clad in a tattered red cloak. He held a staff aloft, chanting words that made the hairs on Daenerys' neck prickle. Could that be Kayvan? She guided Drogon closer. The figure jerked his staff toward them, and Daenerys felt a sudden wave of cold. Drogon roared in pain, faltering in the air as if something invisible clutched at him. Her heart lurched. What was this? She urged Drogon to climb higher, but the wave of cold intensified. A swirling crimson mist seemed to seep out of the staff, reaching for Drogon like grasping claws. Daenerys felt Drogon's panic, heard the ragged edge in his roar. Summoning her courage, she gripped his scales. "Dracarys," she shouted, her voice fierce. Drogon spat flame, and the swirling mist evaporated under the onslaught of fire. The figure on the ledge staggered, cloak aflame, but before Drogon could finish him, he slipped away into a crevice. Below, Kavan's men screamed. Daenerys drew a trembling breath, her pulse hammering. She had never felt magic so directly, not since the House of the Undying or the bloody rites near Khal Drogo's pyre. Perhaps Kavan had found some twisted remnant of sorcery, but Drogon's flames seemed to repel it. She guided him lower, letting him breathe a broad torrent of fire on the fortress walls. Men scattered. The Unsullied seized the moment to breach the entrance. Dario's cavalry descended on the fleeing defenders. The tide was turning, but Daenerys could not banish the chill that clung to her spine. She landed in a cleared space, dismounting swiftly. Drogon prowled behind her, wings half-furled, smoke curling from his jaws. Unsullied soldiers recognized her and rallied at her presence. She saw Grey Worm among them. He gestured that they were securing the fortress. Dothraki riders poured in through a broken barricade. Screams and clashing steel filled the air, punctuated by the roar of flames. Daenerys advanced with caution, watchers forming a protective ring around her as she approached the mine's gaping mouth. A rancid stench emanated from within, death and decay. Shadows flickered, cast by torches that had been hastily dropped. She gripped a sword offered by one of her guards, stepping forward. Drogon growled behind her, but the space was too small for him to follow. Torchlight revealed a series of tunnels, branching off into darkness. Every surface was painted with crimson symbols, some resembling twisted faces, others unrecognizable glyphs. The air felt thick, oppressive. The watchers flinched, murmuring about curses. Daenerys forced herself to stand tall. If Kavan lurked here, she would find him. If this was the source of his so-called power, she would end it. She pressed on, ignoring the dreadful aura. The first chamber opened into a horrifying sight, bodies, draped in red cloth, laid out in a circle. An altar stood at the center, caked in dried blood. The watchers reeled back in revulsion. Daenerys swallowed her nausea. The illusions, the chanting Kavan had stoked fear through these atrocities, forging a cult around pain and terror. Footsteps echoed behind her. Dario appeared, sword in hand, face grim. "We found hostages in another chamber. Grey Worms freeing them. But Kavan is still at large." Daenerys nodded. He fled deeper in. "Come on." They pushed through winding corridors, the watchers lighting fresh torches. 3 times they found small enclaves of frenzied cultists, men who charged with wild eyes and shrieking chants. Daenerys's watchers fought them off, swords clashing in the tight confines. Dario's blade flashed, parrying an axe that nearly buried itself in Daenerys's side. She exhaled in relief, pressing forward. At last, they emerged into a larger cavern lit by guttering candles. At its far end, Kavan stood, a tall figure in tattered red robes, face smeared with dried blood. His eyes shone with a terrible fervor, his cracked lips moving in silent incantation. In one hand, he clutched a staff adorned with animal skulls, in the other a wickedly curved dagger. As Daenerys and her retinue approached, Kavan let out a piercing cry, plunging the dagger into the chest of a terrified captive at his feet. Blood sprayed, and the staff glowed with a ruddy light. A wave of nauseating power rippled outward, causing the watchers to stagger. Daenerys' vision blurred momentarily, her ears filling with a high-pitched hiss. Dario snarled, lunging forward, but Kavan raised the staff again. Another wave of sickly red light pulsed, knocking him back as if struck by an invisible hammer. Daenerys tried to advance, but her limbs felt heavy, her breath labored. Kavan's voice resounded, echoing off the walls, words in a language older than Valyria. She tasted iron on her tongue and fought the urge to collapse. With tremendous effort, she remembered Drogon's roar, the way his flames had banished the red mist outside. She turned to a watcher. "Bring fire," she gasped. The watcher scrambled, one lighting a torch from a fallen candlestick. Daenerys seized it. Through the haze of pain, she hurled the torch at Kavan, hoping to break his concentration. He dodged with an inhuman speed, hissing like a cornered animal. Mario regained his footing and attacked from the side. Kavan spun, staff colliding with Dario's sword. Sparks flew, and the staff cracked but did not break. The watchers advanced in a semicircle, but Kavan unleashed another pulse of vile magic. 2 watchers collapsed, blood trickling from their noses. Daenerys' vision swam. She refused to yield to the darkness pressing in on her mind. She thought of the thousands of people who depended on her, the children in the freed villages, the city of Meereen's future. Rage and love fused in her heart. She found the strength to push forward. She cried out in defiance, "I am Daenerys Stormborn, of the blood of old Valyria. I am the mother of dragons." Her voice thundered in the cavern, resonating with a power that felt older than Kavan's twisted sorcery. She lunged with her sword. Kavan tried to deflect with his staff, but Dario struck from behind, slicing through the warlord's robed shoulder. Kavan howled, stumbling. Daenerys's blade found its mark, biting into his chest. A wave of hot blood spilled over her hand and the staff clattered to the ground. Kavan gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. His dagger dropped, echoing on the stone floor. The twisted energy in the cavern seemed to flicker and die. Daenerys wrenched her sword free, stepping back as Kavan collapsed. For a moment, he glared at her with pure hatred, lips moving silently. Then the light in his eyes extinguished, and he lay still. A hush fell. Dario panted, lowering his bloodied sword. The watchers stared at the staff, which lay inert among the candles. The oppressive feeling began to lift, replaced by a squalid, deathly odor. Daenerys let the sword drop from her hand. She was shaking, though she tried not to show it. All around them, the signs of Kavan's atrocities were visible, discarded bones, half-finished inscriptions on the walls. "We end this," she whispered. "Gather every last trace of this vile magic. Burn it. Bury the dead with respect. If there are survivors still hidden, find them." Dario nodded, his eyes shadowed by weariness. He spat on Kavan's corpse. He had some power. Not enough to stand against a dragon queen. Slowly, they made their way out of the mine. The watchers lit torches along the way, burning Kavan's staff in a makeshift pyre outside the entrance. Columns of smoke rose above the painted mountains. The remaining cultists, seeing their leader dead, either surrendered or flung themselves off the cliffs in hysterical despair. Daenerys forced herself to stand tall, greeting Grey Worm when he arrived with reinforcements. A cheer went up among the soldiers when they realized Kavan was truly slain. But Daenerys felt little triumph, only relief that the horror was ended. In the following days, she oversaw the dismantling of the fortress. The old mine was collapsed with controlled blasts, sealing the cursed caverns forever. Survivors from the surrounding villages, though traumatized, began to return to their homes. She offered them help, food, reconstruction, watchers to keep the peace. Some looked upon her with reverence bordering on worship, murmuring that the Dragon Queen had banished the Red Demon. Daenerys accepted their thanks but gently reminded them that she was no god, only a ruler trying to protect her people. Dario scouted beyond the mountains, confirming no further warlord threats loomed immediately. Grey Worm and the Unsullied cleared out the last pockets of resistance. Slowly, the region settled, though scars remained. Daenerys spent time visiting the rescued hostages, ensuring they received care. More than once, she thought of what she had witnessed in that cavern, the raw evil that men could commit when enthralled by false promises of power. It steeled her resolve to keep forging her empire on foundations of justice and unity. When she was satisfied that stability had returned, she prepared to depart. The sun rose over the painted mountains in a breathtaking array of colors. Soldiers knelt in gratitude. Dothraki riders pounded their chests, calling her the greatest rider of them all. Dario gave her a small smile, his eyes admiring. "Another monster vanquished, my queen. Now the question is, what next?" Daenerys cast her gaze eastward to the horizon. She felt an odd sense of calm. "We return home to Meereen," she said. "Our work isn't done there. And beyond that, wherever our people need us." She mounted Drogon, who rumbled contentedly. With a final look at the painted mountains, once ominous, now shining under the morning light, she urged him skyward. Below, her combined forces would follow, but for now she soared alone, a queen bound to the wind and the promise of a land she had shaped with both mercy and fire. She had refused the lure of Westeros years ago, choosing instead to remain in Essos. Some nights she still wondered if she had done right. But each crisis she quelled, each life she saved, reminded her that destiny was not always the Iron Throne. Destiny could be the lives one touched, the difference one made in the here and now. She would carry that truth with her to the end of her days. Upon returning to Meereen, the city welcomed her with a jubilation that flowed through every street and courtyard. Word of Kavan's defeat had arrived ahead of her, carried by swift riders. Children cheered her name, Mysa, Mysa, as Drogon descended onto the palace terrace. Drums beat, horns blew, and the Freedmen's Council declared a holiday of Thanksgiving. People danced in the markets, some offering plates of spiced rice and roasted lamb, others weaving fresh flowers into garlands. Daenerys, though weary from battle, felt a surge of warmth at their adoration. Yet as she dismounted, her mind turned immediately to the administrative burdens that would no doubt be waiting in the throne hall. Tyrion greeted her at the top of the pyramid steps, Missandei by his side. The dwarf's face held relief. "You've returned in one piece, I see. Thank the gods, these last weeks have been busy." Missandei offered a bright smile. "Yukai is stable again, and Yora sends word that the Freedmen's Council there has redoubled efforts to guard the water supply. There's also news from Karth, they wish to finalize trade agreements. And from Volantis, some rumor about a new Triarch who might be more amenable to our policies." Daenerys nodded, stepping down from Drogon's side. The big dragon took off again, likely seeking a roost outside the city to hunt for goats or sheep. Her retinue of watchers dismounted from their horses, dispersing to reunite with families or get some well-deserved rest. She looked around at Meereen's broad avenues. More than a decade had passed since she first liberated the city, and each time she returned from a distant battle, she saw something new in its evolution: taller buildings, fresh coats of paint on old walls, green courtyards that had once been barren. It was a place of hope, and it was hers. She joined Tyrion and Missandei inside the palace, moving to a private room where they could speak more freely. Missandei poured cool water into cups. Tyrion slumped in a chair with a theatrical sigh, massaging the back of his neck. "We nearly had a revolt while you were gone. A group of spice traders demanded lower taxes. The Freedmen's Council insisted on maintaining the current rate to fund more watchers for the roads. It was quite the debate. We finally reached a compromise, some form of progressive tariff system, which is apparently new to Essos but might work." Daenerys took a cup from Missandei, swallowing gratefully. "I trust your judgment in such matters. Has there been any trouble from the slaver cities?" A hint of a smirk tugged at Tyrion's mouth. "Not openly. I believe our last war taught them a lesson, and your example in the Painted Mountains likely reminds them you can quell rebellions wherever they arise. But we must remain vigilant. Old habits die hard. Some wealthy families in Lys might be quietly financing slavers in the hinterlands. Varys's birds are on it." Daenerys nodded. "Good. Keep me informed. For now, we focus on rebuilding the eastern settlements Cave and terrorized. I want watchers sent to protect those villages. No warlord should be able to spring up in our midst again." Missandei made a note. "I'll arrange it. Also, there's a new wave of refugees from the northern steppes. They say horse tribes have turned violent, possibly due to famine. We need to decide if we're welcoming them into our lands or turning them away." The queen closed her eyes for a moment. Another crisis, another set of souls seeking sanctuary. Over the years, she had opened Meereen's gates many times. It had led to cultural richness, but also tension. Some local farmers resented new arrivals for straining resources. The Freedmen's Council debated how to integrate so many different peoples. Still, Daenerys had always leaned toward compassion. "Let them come," she said softly, "but we must do so in an organized way. Have them settle in areas that can sustain more population. Provide guidance on farming methods if needed." Missandei nodded. "Yes, Your Grace." Tyrion's voice took on a slight note of amusement. "You do realize you're presiding over the largest population migration in Essos since the collapse of the old empire? If we're not careful, you'll end up with an empire spanning from the Rhoyne to the Jade Sea." Daenerys shrugged, a faint smile touching her lips. "If it brings peace and stability to those who've known only suffering, then so be it." She felt the fatigue of the recent battle in her bones. Missandei and Tyrion, sensing her weariness, allowed her a moment of quiet. The hush of the palace corridor, the gentle echo of footsteps, soothed her. She sipped more water, letting her mind drift. Memories of the Painted Mountains mingled with glimpses of the old nightmares. Her brother threatening her, Khal Drogo's pyre, the vision of the Iron Throne in ruins. So much had happened, and she had grown into a woman who bore responsibilities far heavier than a crown of gold. After a short rest, she called a meeting with the Freedmen's Council in Meereen's assembly chamber. Representatives from each district arrived, along with delegates from outlying areas. She recounted the events in the Painted Mountains, explaining how Kayvan the Red was defeated and urging renewed vigilance against any such fanaticism. The council members listened raptly, many expressing relief that their queen had protected their eastern flank once more. When she spoke of the refugees from the north, the council debated how to accommodate them. Some fretted about resources, others argued for the moral imperative of Shelt. "Ring the oppressed. Daenerys guided the debate toward a compromise. They would establish a new settlement zone under watchful supervision, teaching them the ways of the land. If they integrated peacefully, they could eventually become citizens like any other. The days that followed were filled with both celebration and work. A great feast was held in Daenerys' honor, with music and dancing in the city's largest plaza. She attended dressed in a flowing white gown embroidered with subtle golden thread. Her hair, pinned up by Missandei, formed a crown of silver braids, an echo of her Targaryen heritage. She moved among her people, smiling graciously at their toasts and praises. Yet she never allowed herself to grow complacent. Beyond the bright lights of the feast lay a continent still riddled with danger, where old powers and new threats might conspire in the shadows. She took solace in small moments, walking through the gardens at dusk where newly planted trees rustled in the warm breeze, or visiting the city's archives where scribes were compiling histories of her reign, testaments to the villages freed, the battles won, the alliances forged. Sometimes she found Missandei there, teaching young children to read. It was a sight that brought tears to Daenerys' eyes. Each letter they learned was another chain broken, another step toward a society built on knowledge rather than fear. On quiet evenings, she would ascend to a secluded balcony to watch Rhaegal and Viserion circling the city. Drogon often returned by nightfall, landing beside her with a whoosh of air. She would stroke his scales, reflecting on the unstoppable force these creatures represented. Fire and blood had once been the motto of House Targaryen, but she had tempered that fire with compassion. The blood spilled had been in the cause of freedom, not oppression. Sometimes she received letters from Westeros. Travelers or merchants brought tales of wars and alliances, new claimants to old thrones, shifts in power that might have once been her destiny to shape. Yet each time she read these dispatches, she felt a strange detachment. Westeros was her birthplace, but Essos had become her home, her life's work. If the Seven Kingdoms wished to treat with her, they knew where she was. If they needed her dragons, truly needed them for some existential threat, she might consider crossing the sea. But that day had not come, and she could not turn away from the empire that depended on her here. Seasons passed. Meereen thrived, as did Astapor, Ukai, and the smaller settlements that had joined Daenerys' realm. Conflicts still arose: pirates on the coasts, bandit lords in remote mountains, slaver conspiracies that reared their heads in hidden corners. Each time, Daenerys or her captains confronted these threats. Some battles were won by negotiation, some by steel, and some by the overwhelming presence of dragons. Though the scars of slavery ran deep, the Freedmen's Council invested in education, trade, and mutual defense. Over time, the dream of a free Essos gained momentum that even the old masters couldn't fully impede. In Meereen, the great public works continued: an aqueduct that carried fresh water from distant springs, roads that linked previously isolated hamlets. The City Watch had become a respected institution, its ranks filled with men and women who wore their duty with pride. Many were once slaves, now empowered to defend their neighbors. The Dothraki, integrated into this new system of governance, guarded the outer plains and found profit in escorting trade caravans, though they still rode with the fearless wildness that defined their heritage. Daenerys made sure to honor their traditions, and in return, they gave her unwavering loyalty. Grey Worm, stoic and ever-watchful, took command of more garrisons. Dario, restless by nature, traveled far and wide, sometimes quelling uprisings, sometimes courting new allies. Missandei, by Daenerys' side, continued to serve as translator, confidant, and moral compass. Tyrion dedicated himself to intricate statecraft, forging unprecedented trade deals with distant cities such as Ass High and New Guise. Varys remained the silent web-spinner, ensuring that plots against Daenerys were snuffed out long before they could threaten her empire. Each person had found a place within her grand tapestry. Jorah too, though he spent long months abroad, cultivating relationships with remote regions that now recognized Daenerys as the supreme power in southwestern Essos. He kept her informed of any sign that Westeros might reach out or that an exiled master might find refuge across the narrow sea. She was grateful for his devotion, for the counsel he gave that was always honest and often tinged with unspoken affection. Daenerys herself felt the slow passage of time. She was no longer the girl who stepped into Khal Drogo's funeral pyre. Lines of care touched the corners of her eyes, and she sensed that the intensity of her earlier years had been replaced by a steadier flame. She had grown into her role as the mother of an empire, a guardian of the free. Her hair, once the pure silver of youth, was shot with hints of platinum that seemed to glow in the sun. Though the burdens of rule weighed on her, she bore them with a quiet determination that no longer flared into blind rage. She had learned to wield both mercy and wrath in measured balance. In moments of reflection, she thought of the Iron Throne she had never claimed, of the Red Keep she had never seen except in her visions. But as she looked around at the bustling city of Meereen, its markets and libraries, its schools and craft halls, she knew she had given birth to a dream far greater than any single throne. She had created a legacy of liberation, a realm where the downtrodden stood tall and where future generations could grow up without chains. Would Westeros ever match that dream? Perhaps in time, but she would not force it upon them. Her place was here, ensuring that the fragile dawn she had kindled did not fade. And so the years unfolded like pages in a grand chronicle, each chapter bearing witness to victories and trials, alliances and heartbreaks. Yet through it all, Daenerys remained at the helm, her dragons circling overhead, a queen whose presence burned away the shadows of the past. She had refused to abandon the land she had bled for, refused to sail west in pursuit of a birthright steeped in ancient grudges. Instead, she had stayed, building something new, an empire in Essos that championed freedom, prosperity, and justice. Her people called her Mysa, called her the breaker of chains, called her the Dragon Queen. She answered to them all with open arms, seeing in their faces the proof that her choice had been right. And so ended the reign of fear in these once dusty cities. In its place stood a bold experiment, a tapestry of many cultures united by a living legend who had found her purpose not in the conquest of distant realms, but in the nurturing of a continent that, for too long, had suffered under cruelty. Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, had remade Essos in her own image, steadfast, compassionate, and unyielding in the face of evil. Even if history would remember her as the queen who never sought to claim Westeros, it would also remember her as the woman who lit a torch of hope across an entire land and refused to let that flame die.